Hello everyone, I'm Pia Ranada, Rappler's Head of Community. Welcome to Be The Good Rappler's community show about people on a mission, advocacies, and other campaigns here that we amplify here at Rappler. So we've just spent the past few days covering Super Typhoon Carina and of course the enhanced southwest monsoon. Ngayon we are seeing relief efforts, rehabilitation efforts, and conversations going towards what we think is disaster management and what we felt was the impact of disaster response after Carina and the southwest monsoon. So ito na nga yung conversation is shifting to what the government is doing, how we were able to prevent or at least mitigate flooding, which was a major aspect or a major factor in the storms that we saw and were experienced by Luzon cities and Metro Manila in particular. So ito nga yung pinaka-pressing topic, which is why we invited two experts to talk to us today about various aspects of disaster management. And I'm very, very happy to welcome them to the show. So first we have Guillermo Tabios III, who is a professor emeritus at UP's Institute of Civil Engineering. Welcome. Guillermo, thanks for joining us. And we also have Pamela Cajilig, who is a design anthropologist with the UP College of Architecture. Welcome, Pamela.
Hi Pia, hi everyone.
Okay, so I really want to dive into it because I guess first things first, no? Before we talk about flood control, flood projects, disaster response and management, isang top of mind sa mga Pinoy ngayon is exactly what was the damage wrought or what was the kind of impact that Carina and the Southwest Monsoon had. Alam natin, people are comparing online, lalo na with their experience of Ondoy. There are headlines saying this was a stronger, they felt it was a stronger a stronger experience or more rainfall but less intense. Can you just clear it up for us, like as experts? Would we compare the two phenomena, and what would you have to say about whether one was stronger or if impacts were felt in different ways? Maybe we can start with Guillermo.
Yeah. The Ondoy case, if I remember about, it was only like a storm passing through Metro Manila from the Pacific all the way to China Sea in about 7 hours perhaps. And the rainfall, I think between 8 to up to about 2 in the afternoon, was about 255 millimeters. So very intense for that matter. In 24 hours, it reached about 450 millimeters. In the case of Carina, what I've seen in the news, perhaps that was from Pag-asa, 590 millimeters from Monday morning to Wednesday afternoon. So you've got about almost 60 hours, 590 millimeters. So the intensity is smaller, but per hour, millimeters per hour. But of course, it was prolonged. Yeah. Typical habagat, monsoon rains. So that's the difference. But of course, in a matter of if you have prolonged rains for 1.5 days, 2 days, you may be getting floods similar to each other, Ondoy and then Carina.
Okay. How about you, Pamela? Would you be able to weigh in on the difference between the two storms, pero dun sa experience ng tao, like on the level of people experiencing the storm, would you say there was a difference this time around, maybe due to other factors other than rainfall?
Yeah, so I think first of all, it's important for us to distinguish between hazard and disaster. So typhoon and flood, they're the hazards. And what Dr. Guillermo just described is the hazard. Disaster is the impact of the hazard. So not all hazards become disaster. So if you have like a country like Japan, no, na very mas ano yung preparedness and mitigation compared to us, you could have the same level of hazard, different impact. So we're seeing some similarities in terms of the hazards for both Carina and Ondoy. So from a disaster perspective, I look at the impacts. And immediately what I look at is the death toll and the displacement. Mm-hmm. And it's very telling of the figures are very telling of the state of DRRM in the country. Death toll, mas mataas ang Ondoy, 710. Carina, much lower. Last time I checked is 13, pero baka nagsa-search and rescue up to now. So baka umakyat pa yan, but I would say probably not to the hundreds. Mm-hmm. But if you look at displacement, Ondoy 450,000 displaced, for Carina 800,000. So what is that telling us? We're doing better in terms of disaster response, but the more long-term recovery and mitigation, that's where the gaps are.
Right. Okay. One thing that's under the spotlight now is flood management infrastructure because nga flooding was really felt this time around, and President Marcos himself yesterday admitted na places like Valenzuela City na supposedly ang dami ng mga flood management infrastructure, pumping stations, things like that, were still overwhelmed by flooding. And he even said na there might be a need to re-examine flood control infrastructure, flood management infrastructure. And note also that just a few days ago in his SONA, yung State of the Nation address niya, he actually was even very proud of the fact that his administration managed to build 5,500 flood management projects. So ito na nga, look, in medyo scrutinized na ngayon, like naka-spotlight na ngayon yung flood management infrastructure. Guillermo, maybe you can enlighten us, no? Kasi, syempre, layman, not everyone's an expert on how these infrastructure projects work. Are these actually effective? Can explain how these flood control projects typically work?
Yeah, in a lot of, in a big city like Metro Manila, of course, you have several what we call river basins. River is basically a network of river, perhaps in one river basin. So you have to make a distinction among the different basins. Now in Metro Manila, one of the largest is the Pasig Marikina. So Metro Manila, as far as flood control or flood mitigation, so we're talking about 1,200 square kilometers. So just to give you a perspective, Marikina up to Santo Niño in Marikina City is about 530 something. And then all the way going down to Pasig, additional 100. But then there is the San Juan River, which is emanating somewhere in Quezon City, and then it joins Pasig River somewhere in Pandacan. That's an additional 200 with the Pasig. So more or less about 535 plus 200, almost 800 square kilometers. So the others are like your Mikawayan, you have the Tulian, which is not so big. The Tulian River runs from La Mesa all the way to Valenzuela. So that's only about 70 or something square kilometers. Of course, you have the part of Metro Manila, Parañaque, and then you have the Obando, Malabon, Nabotas. Those are small river basins. Now, if you look at there was a World Bank study, flood master plan for Metro Manila in 2010. If you look at all those different flood mitigation plans or projects, it was supposedly about 350 billion. What I understand, in the last 15 years, maybe they have done about 80 billion, maybe 80 billion of the 355. The major part is about 200 billion for the Pasig Marikina. So that's from Marikina River Basin up to Marikina City, and then down to Mangahan, where you divert flood to Laguna Lake, and then you have Parañaque Spillway and so on, and we all the way to Pasig. Now, if I look at flood structures as well as flood plans, it's a combination. There's like the structural measures. So those are flood walls. There's a Marikina Dam that was part of the, it's like a big flood control dam. Maybe there was some detention ponds. There was that Blumentritt cut-off channel and so on. But some are non-structural, where supposedly you remove some of those communities or people in the flood-prone areas. Maybe if you look at the San Juan River, which runs towards that part in Araneta, where, this Araneta and then Quezon Ave, that's quite a low-lying area. Maybe you should no longer live somewhere there and so on. And some areas even in the Mangahan, in Marikina, it's the same thing. But it will be a combination of structural and non-structural measures. But there are other ways, maybe because of the changing land use, changing flood dynamics. Maybe you should high time to review all those plans, because that was done in 2010 and so many things had happened. If you think about flood dynamics, if you put a parking lot, a lot of malls and so on, the flood will, if you have rain, easily it will get into the the area, maybe the drainage system is no longer able to carry those kinds of flood waters that are, generated in a very short time. So no more time to move it to the river and river all the way to Manila Bay. So those are the different. But anyway, maybe we can talk a little bit later if you want to look at some maybe specific solutions. If I have some ideas in mind.
Okay. Related to that, no, is kasi we saw that despite nga these plans, although you did mention incomplete pa, if you mentioned only part of a larger plan has been implemented, and maybe
Yes.
that also contributed to the flooding. But really, like at the end of the day, no, what do you think makes for both of you? What makes Metro Manila so prone to flooding in the first place? You mentioned river basins, but is there all there is to it? Maybe we can start with Pamela.
Yeah, I think it also depends on where in Metro Manila. Kasi iba-iba naman yung types of flooding. There's portions of Metro Manila that's near Manila Bay, so that's coastal flooding. The ones near Pasig, that's your riverine flooding. And then those that are far from those two, yun yung areas na pag umuulan, dun bumabaha, which is pluvial. So I think one lesson in flood management also is the location of the flood is not necessarily the source of where the problem is. And that's why we need to look at it from a river basin level, from a watershed level, because flood is relational siya. It's geographical. It depends on how different places relate to one another. So for example, flooding in Marikina River, we also have to look at the upper watershed. What kind of ano ba yung estado ng bundok? Ano ba yung estado ng forests, no, that help absorb the runoff and prevent erosion. We have to be looking at that. So there is no one simple answer to why is Metro Manila flooded. It really depends, and it's hard to look at one photo or a 20-minute 20-second TikTok video and assume that you know the causes, because it's flood is complicated. I think there are many hazards. There's like drought, extreme heat. Flood is very complicated, and it tends to be a regional problem rather than something that's just contained to a particular city or barangay. And to add to that, in terms of the why is it, despite the investments in flood control, why is it still at the state that it is? I think part of that is because we also don't take the time to analyze what the root causes of the flood are. What we've observed in flood management research around the world, especially on a policy level and analyzing the decisions of flood managers, my tendency to default talaga to hard structural measures, which can be helpful, rather than exploring a combination, which can actually be cheaper in the long run, more sustainable, and can provide more socio-ecological benefits rather than just doing hard structural methods alone, which is the tendency now.
Guillermo, is there a reason why yung mga flood control projects in places like Valenzuela did not work as intended or at least as expected? Parang ano ba yung mga factors surrounding it? Could it just be, like Pamela said, kulang sa ibang interventions? Or what do you think made it not as effective this time around?
Yeah, first of all, I mentioned about this Metro Manila Flood Master Plan 2010, 350 billion, but only 80 happened. So there's always an issue of new investments in flood control structures. No? But first of all, a lot of our cities have been built along yung mga swamplands. You name it, Metro Manila, the Sierra Madre, and then goes down. In about 20-30 kilometers, it becomes a flatland, which is a swampland. Iloilo, same thing, Cagayan de Oro, Davao City, you name it, and so on. But like, for example, if I look at Marikina River Basin, which is about maybe 60-70% of the flood river basin in Metro Manila, to 1,200 square kilometers. The 200 billion that I mentioned, which is to invest in the Pasig Marikina River improvement, Laguna Lake, because we divert water
Yeah.
to temporary store in Laguna Lake and then let it out through Napindan, but then it's not enough to evacuate waters there. So part of it is Parañaque Spillway, but that was never built. But anyway, they're going to build it with the 200 billion. But what I thought was that I've been always advocating that almost 15 years now. What was missing in that flood master plan is perhaps you arrest the problem way back, way up in Marikina River Basin. In fact, I always thought that if you capture at around that Wawa Dam,
Okay.
which is a little bit half, 280 square kilometers, the upper Wawa Dam that's being built now, the associated drainage area is 260 out of 530, so a little bit over half of the drainage area. You make a tunnel, build a tunnel all the way to Pacific Ocean. So you arrest that half of the problem instead of going to Marikina and solving the problem from Marikina all the way to Pasig and so on. You divert which is what they've done in Kuala Lumpur. Kuala Lumpur is here. There's a river, upstream river Klang. Instead of going through Kuala Lumpur, they diverted all the way down, which is what they call a smart tunnel, stormwater management and road tunnel. So that's cheaper than letting the water flow go down and then solve the problem and spend your 200 billion. The idea is that if I were to divert water from Marikina all the way to Pacific Ocean, maybe there's about 25-kilometer tunnel, maybe to Kaliwa Dam and so on, a little bit downstream. The Ondoy case, or even this Carina case, perhaps in the Ondoy case, the height of the storm, maybe you got 4,000 cubic meters per second. You can divert 1,500 to 2,000 cubic meters per second. The 2,000 remaining, that can be carried, it will not go over bank flow in the Marikina River. It will not reach 18 meters in Santo Niño Bridge, maybe only about 13, 14. So that's a big relief as far as flood control. Of course, in the other areas of Metro Manila, Ulian River that goes to Valenzuela, maybe combinations of detention ponds and so on. But the thing is that can you build those kinds of detention ponds because it's already urbanized? Maybe you have to build some underground storage tanks, just like in Tokyo or in BGC, they have a underground storage tank. But in fact, if you look at España, in the 70s, early 70s, they built underground storage at the bottom of España. But after about 10 years, they were all filled with sediments or garbage. So it's already abandoned. And a lot of people don't know about that.
How much would that cost, Guillermo? Yung sinasabi niyo pong tunnel from Wawa Dam to Pacific Ocean, how much would that cost though?
About 10 years ago, I had students to do some studies on that. About 30 billion, 35 billion.
Cheaper than 200 yung balance ng World Bank.
Yes, because essentially, you let the water flow down to Marikina City and then dealt with it in Mangahan, dealt with it in Laguna Lake and so on. But then that's the problem. But in this case, you already capture. But it's at Marikina River Basin to Pasig River. Other areas, perhaps, we have to look at the different kind of solution.
Okay. I want to talk about two initiatives that the government is also eyeing as solutions to flooding and even other development problems. These are dredging and reclamation. So I wanted to get your comments on it. Kasi may mga environmental groups calling dredging a false solution because it will lead to siltation, may mga damage to aquatic ecosystems, for example. But some on the other side of the fence, people are saying it's the best way, the quickest way to prevent flooding. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Actually, as far as dredging, one particular area that I'd look at, actually, the outlet of Laguna Lake to Pasig River. That's the Napindan River, which is between that area in a little bit in Pasig, I mean not Pasig, but Taguig, all the way to Napindan, which is the C5, junction of the Pasig and Lower Marikina River. If you dredge, and that's what I thought, the accumulation of sediment there is about 4 meters.
Okay.
If you're going to dredge that, perhaps you can reduce the time it takes to bring the waters in Marikina from about 13 meters, 14 meters to about 12 or 11.5 in about maybe 30 days instead of 3 months, 90 days. So that's a gain if you think about dredging Napindan River. But other areas, definitely, there are gains in doing dredging. But the problem is that, like in Marikina River Basin, it's kind of steep slopes. But when it gets to Marikina City, the gradient is about 8 meters to 35,000 meters, 35 kilometers. That's fairly flat as far as sediment, ability to move sediments. That's why Marikina River, Marikina City, that area in Loyola Grand Villa, there was a Tumana bridge before, an overflow bridge. About 20 years ago, you can still use that overflow. Now it's buried maybe 6-7 meters below. That's how much sediments had gone through. So you have essentially shallowed the river. You have then reduced the carrying capacity.
I see.
I mean, there are dredging, but in the case of a swampland, Metro Manila, it's kind of a big job to do dredging. So you can do surgical dredging here and there, but not quite in a general sense that it will work.
How about reclamation? So we know a lot of reclamation projects going on in Manila Bay, the south of Manila. What do you think of this as, of course, it's touted as a development and economic, supposed to be potential to generate more income and more jobs, but what do you think would be this impact on flooding and even in general, like our resilience and our ability to prevent other harms?
That's an issue always when you do reclamation. If you think about Rojas Boulevard, maybe that runs about 5 kilometers all the way south. Let's just put it that way. Imagine how you reclaim that one. Instead of the water already draining around Rojas Boulevard, it is now going to drain about 200 meters or maybe 1 kilometer out in the sea. You have a very flat land. How are you going to move that supposedly the river width, so to speak, that where the water could drain is about 5 kilometers. Now you reclaim. And then you put artificial drainage or waterways, maybe 5 or 6, maybe 300 meters wide. So 300 times 6, that's only 1.2 against 5 kilometers river width, so to speak. So definitely you'll have an issue if you reclaim in an area where it is where the bulk of the water drains, like in Pasay or Pasig. That's where the Pasig River is, right? So unless you're able to recreate or still retain the ability to move water into the bay, because that's the lowest point, the sea, basically, how are you going to do that? You're going to lose a lot of money if you build a big, a 5 kilometer wide river instead of just 5 or 300, right? So that's what happened, for example, even I've seen that in that area in Pagcor. That is drainage from Tripagalina and so on, but it's a very small compared to originally. That was a big open area that the water could already drop into the seashore. Yeah. But now they have to move that water through this drainage canal. So what they do is you pump it up. You help it by pumping. But you can only do so much when you do pumping. Because first you have to bring it on that side and then pump it and so on. But that's an issue with a flat land. If you start reclaiming in a very flat land, you'll have an issue with how to create a channel that's wide enough or big enough to be able to retain the old or the historical, what we call river capacities.
Pamela, you had a tweet that was shared by a lot of people, and it was a tweet where you were basically saying to blame the flooding that happened on climate change or yung walang disiplina narrative that kasi Filipinos daw don't throw their garbage properly. That you say if you perpetuate that kind of narrative that it's too simplistic, diba? That you're blaming just these two things. Funnily enough, President Marcos actually did blame these two things for flooding but you also said that apart from those two things, diba, there are many other factors, and you mentioned one major factor is land subsidence. So, and of course, diba, to viewers, land subsidence is when the land gets lower because of extracting groundwater too much. So, could you just explain, parang if ito nga yung land subsidence is a major factor in leading to more flooding, more exacerbated flooding, how then does the government address it? How should they address it?
The propensity to turn to reclamation as a flood solution, particularly in Manila Bay, the rationale for that is sea level rise, which is a climate change related rationale. But if you look at the data, if you look at the graphs, I mean, the question talaga, one of the flood puzzles in Manila Bay is, is it sinking or is the sea rising? And the data shows land subsidence is really a major factor. Now, the thing is, it's politically easier to do reclamation than to address land subsidence, because once you address land subsidence, then you have to look at resettlement, for example, no? And make sure it's participatory. Talk to real estate developers. Talk to, of course, kailangan din naman pareho yung mga local government. But mas marami lang actors ang involved if you wanna address land subsidence. Yung sa disiplina basura, I mean, of course, kailangan malinis yung drainage natin. And there are certain, again, it really has to be site-specific. There are certain portions in the city where ang talagang nagkukos nung immediate, I'd say immediate cause of flood would be nakabarang drainage. But, I mean, if you live in a floodplain, whether or not you clean your drainage, babaeng ka talaga, di ba? So for me, that's a bit simplistic. And also, as someone who visits a lot of downstream sites that are flooded, a lot of the garbage that you see in these sites aren't actually garbage of the people living in these sites. And you can note that in the photos, if it literally looks like a river of garbage, then that means that's carried from upstream to downstream, no? So which really compounds the problem of flooding. Kasi syempre may pollution concern ka na, may sanitation ka pa. And then downstream, if there's a lot of reclamation, then the polluted water will also corrode the concrete. I just want to add to the discussion two things, no, in terms of why the hard infrastructure heavy projects aren't working. So far, our discussions are assuming that these are quality works, ha. Pero yung assessment ng quality, that's another story altogether. Like for one site that I visited, after 1 year, talagang bakbak yung seawall. So this is in the Manila Bay area. I brought a team of architects with me to see, no, kung ano yung kinulang sa structure, kinulang sa bakal. So that's another dimension. So one helpful concept here is the concept of maladaptation. There's a lot of the flood solutions that are proposed, pag hindi siya pinag-isipan, if it's not evidence-based, if it's not participatory and connects to the lives of the people, then the same solutions can really exacerbate the flood problems that you aim to fix. The other thing that I would like to add is also there's flood control, which is what we've been talking about now, versus flood management, which is really a wider view, no? Kasi sometimes you can control the flood na wala naman ng trabaho ng mga tao, nasira yung mga mangroves for reclamation. So may impact yun sa mangingisda, may impact yun sa natural flood protections natin that are free versus reclamation na pagkamahal-mahal. So we have to look at it in a more holistic concept, not just controlling the water, but also making sure that these are done in ways that are just and equitable and won't exacerbate poverty and vulnerability. So my third point also is this whole these disasters that we're experiencing, they are happening in a wider context of poverty and inequity, no? Not just between individuals, but also between LGUs. And so, of course, the poorer you are, yung capacity mo to be resilient to flooding. Kahit, kunyari, we reduce flooding from kung ilang meters to ilang meters, pero homeless ka, vulnerable ka pa rin to flooding. So, the technological solutions to flooding will only work if we're also addressing them at a social and political level. Because that's what disasters are. They're not just environmental phenomena. They're also, and I would say to a large extent, social and political events.
You mentioned nga na may emphasis on hard infra, on like built structures. You've also talked about a term that might be new to a lot of people, nature-based flood management. So I wanted to, maybe you can help our viewers understand what is nature-based flood management, and is it too late for Metro Manila na sobrang dami ng built structures, it's highly urbanized? Can we still do nature-based flood management in Metro Manila?
Yeah, you can do so first of all, nature-based flood management is integrating conservation issues in flood management issues. And the rationale there is one, it's nature that also protects us from flood disasters. And secondly, managing flood has to be two-way, no? For human life to be sustainable into the future. So hindi lang siya dapat about flood control, iniisip din natin yung housing, iniisip din natin yung livelihood, iniisip din natin yung effect ng flood methods natin on trees, on fishes, on animals, everything that makes up the ecosystem. So nature-based flood management would include, for example, upper watershed restoration, constructed wetlands, wetland restoration, but it can also happen on a smaller community scale, like having urban gardens or parang rainwater collection at a household scale. But I think it's just important to add this into the mix so that we can widen the possibilities for reducing flood risk in a way that won't harm the environment. Because if we harm the environment, all of us are affected. So the other thing that we also need to be looking at, so we see Dr. Guillermo has extensively talked about hard methods, there's nature-based methods, and then there's also non-structural methods to address flood risk, like multi-hazard early warning, also revisiting yung land use plans, no? Where's the optimal place to build housing? Where do we put our commercial spaces? And in fact, in a lot of flood management studies, it shows that if you consider itong non-structural first, minsan mas effective pa siya than the other structural methods. But of course, like I always say, it's very place specific. It needs different kinds of data to understand the root causes of flooding and also understand what the solutions are. And at the end of the day, the people who are most affected by the flooding should be part of the decision making for flood management.
Speaking of built infra, of course we've heard of the PAREX project that's being championed by one of the richest Filipinos, right, Ramon Ang, and he's been saying that even if he said he will not push through with it, hindi pa canceled yung project, and so there's still a looming threat. Like a lot of communities in Pasig River are still worrying that magpupush through yung PAREX. I wanted to get your opinions as experts. Ano ba yung effect, ano yung maging effect ng PAREX if it is built, the Pasig River Expressway? If it is built, how would it affect the flooding situation in Metro Manila?
I think you're talking about yung Pasig River and Expressway, right?
Yes, yeah, PAREX. Yeah.
Actually, part of the skyway that connects Makati to Quezon City, it's along San Juan River. It's very much similar model. So it will be the structures will be bridge structures nandun sa tabilan ng river. I think one of the concerns was whether it will impact the river ecology if you have this big shadow at the bottom and so on. I haven't really seen how the ecological impact, if it's big or not so big. So I don't really have comments. I just want to add yung sa non-structural measure because in Pampanga na Delta, that's perennially flooded. Macabebe, Santo Tomas, Sasmuan, and so on. But if you look at non-structural measure, you really have to build, perhaps you have to rethink how you build houses. Perhaps the houses should be built on stilts. And then the roadways may no longer be real roadways, but they can be a roadway or a channel, flood channel, or a river channel when you have big floods. And maybe you have to think in terms of river boats, or air boats, which are those boats with propeller, so you can go along those swamplands, traverse through swamplands. Because I've noticed in that area, they have been building the roads higher and higher, but leaving the settlements or the communities same elevation and so on. And then there's a big flood, there's what we call a lot of rain that causes local flooding, no way for the water to go out of that settlement. Some subdivision or pockets of this housing. So from a social point of view, that's really antisocial. Why build that way without looking at how it really it's adversely affecting the people's shelter from the point of view of good living and so on. So those are things that not only from a flood structural point of view, but a social infrastructure, shelter, and so on point of view, and even the transportation. Because there are a lot of swampland in other parts of the world where they have to adapt to that kind of perennial floods because they live in a virtual wetland, so to speak. Even in the Philippines, Agusan Marsh is a 15 square kilometer, the Ramsar area. You can see the houses are built on stilts and they have bangka. So during the 3 months, during the months of the wet months of April, May, and so on, they have bangka instead of motorbikes or tricycle or whatever. So that's a way you adapt to these kinds of situation.
Right, parang
that's,
almost a lifestyle
We
change.
learn how to live with nature as our ancestors have done. And for me, it's just ironic. We're an archipelago. Dapat yung river, sentro yan ng buhay natin. But what are we doing, no? They're used as dumping grounds. They're really the ignored and sacrificed places in our communities. But if you look at cities who have managed to make rivers the center of city life, they're very vibrant, no? We don't even have to look at global north. Let's just look at Thailand, for example, the Chao Phraya River, no? So, may value siya in terms of transport, no? Wala silang expressway, pero may boats. May transport boats, may commuter boats. So you can, kung transport lang yung solution, you don't need an expressway. You can do what Thailand is doing. And then because there's the commuter transport system encourages walking along the river, then may tourism, may appreciation for cultural heritage. So in as far as Parex is concerned, we have to look at what we are losing in terms of actual and potential versus what is being promised by the project. I also want to relate it to another disaster, yung Parex, to earthquake. Kasi we have to prepare for the big one. And when the big one happens, we can expect the major roads in Metro Manila will be blocked. And an open Pasig River really presents a lot of opportunity as an alternative route for humanitarian aid to push through, to pass through, no, for people to be able to evacuate. So again, I think one of the problems din talaga in general in disaster management, not just in the Philippines but across the world, is very siloed thinking. That so many things that we do are interrelated. Like for example, for flood control measures, like what Dr. Guillermo said, may impact yan on housing, right? So, but who is looking at the intersection between uh, infrastructure and housing and livelihood? Parang it's we can see all the gaps there. Walang masyadong nagko-connect.
I remember reading histories of Binondo in Manila na it used to have so many esteros and creeks, but eventually they would just get, tinatabunan na lang siya, whether it's, housing or other developments. And it's almost like Manila is reasserting its identity as a more watery place than we know it today. And maybe it's better nga if we just accept it for who it is, for what it is. I also wanted to ask about something that the president also mentioned in his SONA, na he wanted to have a Department of Water. And this is really about, water supply, how do the water systems relate to one another? And of course, kasama na dito yung flood system, right? So I wanted to get your thoughts. Do you think a Department of Water would address some of these siloed thinking? Or what do you think would be the benefits or the cons of such a policy if it were to be passed?
I was just reviewing the wording of that bill. So, ang assessment naman in terms of wording, it's very nice. No, I think there are 5 sections. The first 4 sections talagang water as a public good, and Filipinos' right to water. I think one of the concerns lang ng civil society is the last section where government reserves the right, I think that's how it's worded, to have intersectoral partnerships for water management, which opens it up to being overtaken by commercial interests. And learning from how other departments, ano yung impact, no, of having these sort of departments from other countries. If you have yung pag-overtake ng private sector interests, well, hindi necessarily nagiging equitable ang access to water resources, and then the problems like sanitation, ganon, don't usually get solved. One of the proposals there is, my personal view is, before we look at policy innovation, which costs a lot of hard-earned taxpayer money, we look at what we can do within the current system, and especially adopt a mindset of maintenance and repair. Because I believe, and perhaps Dr. Guillermo can speak more to this. I believe that about 90% of our watersheds are in critical condition. So dun pa lang, even without that new department, if you just address that has so much impact on implications for better flood management, disaster management, livelihood, biodiversity. So let's see what we can do first with the current setup, is my view there.
Okay. Fortunately or unfortunately, I was one of the advocates of creating a Department of Water. So in 2011, during the time of President Noynoy Aquino, so I was asked by Don Paderanga, who was then a NEDA Director General, and later on R.C. Balisacan. So I wrote a policy paper, what to do with the water sector and how we do things as far as managing the country's water resources. And then came another study where to look at the details of how you will implement a river basin. So, such a water super body, that's the label then. So the idea of the water super body is because, again, going back 20 years ago, you have so many water-related agencies that they have been fragmentary or even conflicting, and they are siloed, so to speak. And when you talk about water resources, maybe 30 years ago, we've been talking about the Dublin Principles, integrated water resource management. Because in water, just like energy, you have a lot of sources and you have a lot of uses. But in addition to beneficial use, you have these an adverse use. I mean, not really a use, but you have to control flood waters. Now, when you look at the water resource system, it can be good for water supply, hydropower, for irrigation. On the other hand, maybe the same infrastructure that you will have a reliable water supply when and where needed could be the same to do flood control and so on. Now, in the Philippines, the way we do governance, it's what we call sectoral.
Yeah.
DPWH does flood control, NIA does irrigation, DNR does conservation watershed. But since 20, 30 years ago, we have been talking about integrated water, and that's how you manage your water resource from the point of view of the conservation to control of waters. Now, we don't have a water body which is able to coordinate, orchestrate, direct all these water resource development from different sectors for different purposes. It's by sectors, I mean. So the idea of the Department of Water is really to create an apex body to be able to orchestrate all these different water resources plans from conservation or water supply to control of waters. And that apex body is the Department of Water, just like you have a Department of Energy to orchestrate as an apex body developments in energy generation and all the way to the users. But in our case, in water, you have to manage the water resources for different purposes. And one of them is flood control, which is to control water, which is even difficult. And the difficulty with water resources is that the hydrology or the hydraulics of flow is so uncertain. You know, it's all this uncertainty as far as the climate, the weather, and then you have your uncertainty in the sediment transport and so on. But nobody's looking at it from that holistic point of view. And that's the way we should do it. That's the reason why that idea of having an apex body to manage our country's water resources for those different purposes. And otherwise, all of them are disintegrated with those different sectoral water-related agencies. Nobody talks to each other. Nobody really collaborate, because like a flood control reservoir can also be a conservation for like Pantabangan, I mean, like Angat, hydropower generation and so on. But in fact, in the case of DPWA, I've seen a lot of their work. They don't really look at flood control from that point of view of looking at the headwaters, the watershed. Because upstream, you can already do some flood control before it gets to your urban areas. So from the point of view of managing, planning, managing, or design of our water resource systems, there's no agency that does looking at it from a holistic point.
And I think, I think in terms of the intent of and how it's worded, maganda yung intention. I think ang kailangan lang bantayan is people's participation. It should be participatory. Kailangan may involve.
Yes, that's a very important component. When the Department of Water, the way the governance structure or the organizational structure is set up, it is functional, not sectoral. So you have planning, division, you have this operation studies and so on, you have scientific support, you have even stakeholders or division. Because that's part of, in the case of integrated water resource management, you have these three pillars. You have the management instruments from the point of view of data all the way to studies and simulations and so on. You have these legal instruments, and then you have the institutional role where you really have to interact and to develop relationship with the locals to be able to bring, to be able to push your agenda as far as water resource management is concerned. Otherwise, if people are not in line, no consensus, no shared vision, you cannot manage water properly.
Yes. And we have to note that local participation has decreased in the last two administrations. So there really has to be a voice in civil society there. Also, especially since when we look at the major policies that are helping us manage disaster at the moment, the DRRM law and the climate change it was really pushed by civil society. So I agree. No, we've been talking about the need to manage silos, pero participatory.
So in any case, in the DWR, if you really look at the bill, because I've seen essentially, started the draft of that in 2014, and it's gone through Duterte's administration and the Marcos administration. Now it's in the Senate. It passed third final reading in Congress. So I've been closely involved in the consolidating the different bills. So I'm quite familiar with what's in there.
Okay.
So as long as if it's created and then you have this champion that will really push properly the department, I think it should have more benefits compared to without an apex body to water source management.
So I have one last question that I'm really eager to ask. But before that, we want to also talk to a member of the Rappler team, a digital communication specialist, Krista Escudero, who did a social media scan about the conversations around Carina and about the enhanced southwest monsoon, and really to know ano na bang pinag-usapan ng mga tao about the storm and how government has responded. So, Krista, what have you seen online?
Hi, so many people shared photos and videos of the situation in their communities, no? Sobrang daming bahay, mga daan na sobrang lubog sa baha from knee, waist to chest level. So, yung iba parang dinaanan nila sa sense of humor. So, parang naging coping mechanism na siya ng mga Pinoy basta may disaster. So, yung Taft Avenue na sobrang malaking daan siya, di ba? So, naging Taft River na siya dahil lubog na siya sa baha. And then, people were comparing the floods to what they experienced during Ondoy in 2009 and Ulysses in 2020. So, yung may isang post na nag-point out na naging veterano na raw sila ng dahil sa Ondoy tsaka sa Ulysses. Yung isa, parang yung iba, parang nag-war flashbacks na sila. I remember nung Ulysses, parang nag-war flashbacks sila nung Ondoy, tapos ngayon si Carina and Habagat, parang double war flashback na siya, yung Ulysses and yung Ondoy na yung naaalala nila. So, people also recalled yung 5,500 flood control projects that President Marcos took pride in just in his latest SONA nung Monday, na very ironic na just 2 days after, parang na-fact check daw si Marcos ni Carina at saka ni Habagat na despite those projects, baha pa rin yung dinanas ng mga tao due to the insistent heavy rain. So, people also lamented yung loss of green spaces, yung like may isang tweet na nag-point out kung gaano ka grabe yung deforestation ng mountains sa Rizal. And Rizal was one of the places na suffered so much due to the floods. So also many also pointed out yung reclamation development areas, especially sa Manila Bay, the one we have already discussed today. So those projects, those development projects, they say greatly aggravated yung flooding na nangyari. So, ano yung mga solutions na pinopose? So, we mentioned kanina na yung thread ni Dr. Pamela sa X got a lot of engagement. So, if I'm not mistaken, it expounded on the factors kung bakit sobrang flood prone ng Metro Manila, and it's not just because of climate change or the individualistic na narrative na kulang sa disiplina yung mga tao when it comes to basura. So may isa din na nag-point out kasi nga nung sinabi ni Marcos na climate change and hindi nagtatapon ng maayos ng basura yung mga tao, yung reasons bakit grabe yung pagbaha. May na-point out na paano naman sila magiging disiplinado sa pagtapon ng basura kung hindi naman proper yung waste management systems in the first place. So there are also posts from Timothy James Cipriano of the Geography Department sa UP Diliman na nag-urge to look into the structural roots of disasters and check kung yung mga existing solutions right now are actually causing more risks and vulnerabilities. So, may interesting din, may isang parang nag-branch out na discussion kasi may nag-viral na post na nag-share siya ng photos and videos sa BGC na hindi masyadong binabaha. So, may nag-mention, if I'm not mistaken, na mayroon daw 6-story na basin or cistern sa ilalim ng Virgo Circle. I'm not quite sure, I'm not familiar.
BGC.
Yeah, tama.
But yun daw yung nagka-catch ng flood water dun sa area kaya hindi masyadong binabaha. So many were lamenting parang bakit may ganong solutions sa BGC pero sa ibang areas naman sa Metro Manila wala. So may issues of class divide na yung mga may kaya yung nakaka-enjoy ng ganong mechanisms or flood management measures, pero yung mga nasa ibang parte naman ng Metro Manila, walang ganung masyadong measures na na-experience. So all in all, there's a sense of frustration na even despite many years and many storms na dumaan na dito sa Pilipinas, same pa rin yung visuals na nakikita natin online and offline na may baha, may evacuations, may mga tao na humihingi ng tulong. So it's the same ship, different years. So parang pagod na yung mga tao ng narrative ng resilience na kaya natin to, etc. So they're saying it's about time na to hold those in power accountable. And we've been saying that many times already, pero yun pa rin yung nangyayari, which also adds to the frustration.
May questions ba kayo for Krista?
Well, I just want to comment, in the Philippines, we have what we call this culture of disaster. Because of our being fatalistic or maybe Roman Catholicism, I don't know, na bahala na. It seems like disasters it is our fate, our destiny. But actually, we're a bit complacent as far as that is concerned. We could maybe make more noise, just like in BGC, for example. The ability to see that kind of scenario. That's why nagkaroon sila ng detention or yung underground storage. And even here, in Vertis North, Quezon City, there is that big pond in the middle where you could, store temporarily water bago mo itakbo doon sa San Juan River. The idea is that a lot of times, and that's in fact one of the big division in the Department of Water, is yung scientific support system where if you wanted to make plans and then you have futures thinking, you have to do a lot of simulations. Different scenarios, future scenarios, different land use, different climate scenarios, and see what happens, what works, what doesn't work, what works in this barangay, doesn't work in that barangay. And that's how you should really try to plan let's say, for flood control. It's an iterative process, it's a sustained process because every year, change in administration, change in land use, you'll change the flood dynamics. And I think we have been looking at always depending on master planning, which are done every 10 years or every 20 years, and yet investments come in after 10 or 20 or 30 years where you already overtook yung plano mo noon. And that's supposedly one of the, nowadays, when you talk about DWR, it's a budget that will do adaptive planning. Every day, maybe you have to look at this. Every day. when you talk about flood management of Metro Manila, not only what happens, you react when Undoy comes or Carina comes or Ulysses comes, but look at scenarios. Look at all kinds of scenarios every day. It's like playing a game of chess and looking at different, before you have the chess championship or you have the chess event. So that's the kind of how we should do resilient planning. It's a continuous process, adaptive planning, and so on.
Agree ako sa sinabi ni Dr. Guillermo, futures thinking. In Diliman, there are pockets of that happening, and also in other places. We're also starting that in the College of Architecture, because poverty is also poverty of the imagination. Dapat nabubuksan din yung isip ng mga tao. But I will, as a social scientist, I'll need to push back a little lang on yung cultures of disaster. Fatalistic tayo. Kasi madami na talagang studies in sociology, anthropology na the reason people act the way they do is very connected to the sort of governance that also limits their choices. But agree, no? Futures thinking, there is greater appreciation, futures thinking and foresight, greater appreciation for that. And really also doing it in an evidence-based way. I'm very big on data and really different kinds of data, quantitative and qualitative, to help us imagine what the scenarios could be like, and how to plan for that. And maybe avoid the term future-proof. Kasi sa akin yung term na future-proof, you do one thing, a set of things, I've owned the future. But the future is a moving target. Even like the projections for climate change. Some figures that came out about 2 or 3 weeks ago are saying na it's worse than the warming is actually thought. So the future is a moving target. What we need is that capacity to imagine and the solutions should be.
Okay. So thank you so much for that, no? And actually it partly answered my last question, but I really just wanted to ask it and maybe get your opinion on this really urgent, I think everyone's asking it, no? Is there still hope for Metro Manila? Can Metro Manila ever be flood-proof? And what would it take to at least lessen the suffering that Metro Manila citizens or even citizens of very similar cities, what does it take to lessen their suffering? Possible pa ba to for Metro Manila? What does it take?
To me, I think it requires a different approach to flood management. In resilience planning or resilience for that matter, we have this engineering resilience where every time there's a disaster, there's a collapse in your system, you try to go as fast back to the normal. But there is that other resilience, ecological or even evolutionary resilience, where every time you have a collapse in the system, like a disaster, then you will look at new normal. Look at other ways rather than as fast as you go back to the normal that you think of. In other words, every time something happens, you have to recreate again yourself. You have to innovate. And not only like, oh, another flood wall, oh, another drainage. Maybe some other ways to do it, because the nature or man-made structures, they also change, right? They are evolutionary. So every time you have a change, a subdivision is built, another roadway is built, you have to rethink. Another big flood happens, maybe another flood scheme, another flood mitigation scheme you have to adopt. So there is hope, but the approach should be revised. That's the idea.
Yeah. For me, disasters are always preventable. Nasa sa atin yun. Just 2 things for me. We need to build solidarity in community, because when we're struck with disaster, tayo-tayo lang din naman ang tutulungan. And second, vote for leaders who won't put us in harm's way, who will make the kind of decisions that will avert disaster.
Thank you so much. Those were very, very insightful, and we're so thankful for your time. I know you must be very, very busy right now, given your expertise. So thank you so much for this. Thank you, Pamela and Guillermo. And of course, if anybody would like to comment on this episode, if meron kayong insights you'd want to share, you want to react to some of the comments and insights shared by our experts, you can do so by going to the Rappler Communities app. We have a chat room dedicated to environment and science. So it's the Environment and Science chat room. Please do check it out. We also have a Livable Cities chat room if you also want to talk about it in the aspect of urban life. So thank you so much for watching. Again, I'm Pia Ranada, Rappler's Head of Community. You've been watching Be The Good, Rappler's Community Show. See you next time. Goodbye.
Thanks, Pia.
Thank you so much.
Pamela.
Thanks, Dr. Guillermo. Thanks for
Okay.